White is clearly winning here. Nothing can stop the queening of the e-pawn. But why? Because white was able to occupy one of the 6 squares in front of the pawn with their king. These squares are called key squares. With white pawn on e6, if white king can occupy any of those 6 squares, white is winning, no matter where black king is, no matter whose move is it. That is the definition of key squares in pawn endgames. A key square is any square where if your king occupies it, you win by queening the pawn, no matter who is to move. That's the magic, guaranteed with victory. Let's look at another position. The pawn is on e6 again, but white king did not reach any of the key squares yet. The win depends on whether that will happen. If white is to move, it does not work. Whatever white plays, black simply stays with their king ahead of the pawn, and white can't break it ever. If they decide to push the pawn, it is clearly a draw by either stalemate or by king stepping away. So it is a draw. But in that same position, if black is to move, something completely different happens. So black moves and goes to e8 square. White can now push the e7 pawn, and black has to step away. Now white can occupy one of those 6 key squares that we talked about a second ago, and white can clearly win. So what is the difference between those two positions? Whether white king can occupy one of the key squares or not. So where are those key squares? They depend on the position of that last pawn. In most cases, there is a simple formula. Look 2 squares ahead of the pawn. The 3 squares in a row at that level are your key squares. For example, for our pawn on e4, 2 squares ahead is the 6th rank. The key squares are d6, e6, and f6. Get your king on any of these and you'll queen the pawn. This pattern works for every central pawn that is not on A or H file. 2 squares ahead, 3 squares across. That's your target zone. So let's check it. Can white king reach any of those key squares in time? Yes, it is very clear that white can reach the key square d6 and black king can't do a thing about it. So what can black king do now? Absolutely nothing. Whatever they play, white is clearly winning this game, and there's nothing that black can do about this. That is the concept of key squares. If you can reach them, you are winning. If not, it is a draw. You might remember from my video about the opposition, link is in the description, that it is much easier to win if your pawn is already on the other side of the board. Why so? Because that pawn does not have only the classical key squares, which are 2 squares ahead, 3 squares across, d7, e7, f7 in this case, but also 3 squares adjacent to it, so d6, e6, and f6. Let's check how it works. So white king goes to d5, black king tries to approach, and white king manages to occupy that key square of d6. Whatever black plays now, it is easy for white to win, either this way or simply by taking the opposition in the right moment at e6 square, getting to a similar type of position. So what was the case? Why did white win? Because it was able again to occupy one of the key squares. Rook pawns, so pawns on A and H files, are different and very tricky, as it is very easy to defend against them. Let's look at this example. You get the opposition, but it doesn't really help. Black king simply stays in front of the pawn, and there is nothing you can do to chase it out of there. If black gets into the corner in time, There's nothing you can do. It is simply a draw. Even the opposition doesn't help with rook pawns. You also know from my previous video about drawing, link in the description, that this is also a draw. White king can't come out of the h-file because black king won't let him. Even if white king manages to get out through b6, black king takes the corner again, and there is no way for white to win this. What are the key squares for the rook pawns? There are in fact only two. So what are they? Which key squares should white king occupy here to queen and win this endgame? There are in fact only two. It's b7 and b8. If white king can reach any of them in time, white is winning. If not, it is a clear draw. Let's check how it works. White king is approaching, black king starts to also race towards it, but white king is faster and gets to a b7 square. That means that white king should be winning, right? As you can see, it is very simple win right now because a pawn can simply march and become the queen. Remember that there are only two key squares for a rook pawn. That is why it is the easy one as a draw for the weaker side. So avoid these endgames unless you are absolutely certain you can reach the key squares in time. Key squares are your roadmap to victory or to a draw if you are defending. Identify them and control them to get the best result from your pawn endgames. That's the Endgame Unlocked. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the board.